Hey, y'all, I'm Bud Elliott, and this is Cover 3 College Football Summer School. We've done our research on the teams, and now we're bringing on the top team experts from the 24/7 Sports Network to help us fill in the blanks. Please follow us on Twitter at Cover 3 Podcast. That's Cover 3 Podcast. And leave us a 5-star review on Apple and Spotify. All right, class is in session. Hey, guys, welcome back into the Cover 3 Podcast. This is Bud Elliott, and this is College Football Summer School. And today we're talking a little Vanderbilt, and we're joined by Robbie Weinstein of Vandy247. Robbie, welcome to the show, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Bud. Spring practice has wrapped up, and it's basically transfer season now.
It is indeed transfer season. For transparency, we are recording this on the 26th. I think we're running about 10 days on release. So if you're hearing this, I think Robbie will be pretty future-proof. But, of course, May 1st is the transfer deadline, so we'll see who else transfers out or transfers in. We'll be pretty busy there coming up. So Vanderbilt last year, a difficult year, but a transition year, not unlike many schools that had a transition year last year. 122nd overall in kind of the consensus blend of the major power ratings out there, and a difficult year. You know, when you watch them, I think team speed was probably one of the real things that we're looking to improve. But I kind of want to just get your overall sense of where Vanderbilt is in its rebuild process under Clark Lea. I mean, I think we always understood it to be a long-term rebuild. Do you feel like they are on schedule?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's for sure it's going to be a long-term rebuild, and it's because, like you said, the team speed was non-existent last season. And, you know, I think they have made some good steps in terms of adding to that via recruiting. But it's only been really high school recruiting. They haven't had they haven't taken a ton of transfers. And for the most part, those haven't been guys at the offensive skill positions. They did get one corner who's going to help, Jeremy Lucien from UConn, who's a good player. But I think in general, Vandy is going to generally be focused on high school recruiting. And that means that this is going to take some time. It's going to take time for those guys to develop. Particularly the offensive line has been a big issue for years now. And of course, that's a position that takes a lot of time for guys to get in the weight room, you know, shed bad weight, put on good weight, and get used to the speed of the game, especially in the SEC. So I wouldn't say Vanderbilt is off schedule. It's just that this is a pretty long-term rebuild. And, you know, what they're going to have to show this season is, even though nobody expects them to have a good record, they're going to need to be a little bit just at least less non-competitive, because there were so many games last season against, you know, kind of so-so opponents or merely good opponents where they just got completely steamrolled, and they can't continue to do that this fall.
For sure. Obviously, I should know this, but we've already done the Stanford episode and a couple other schools that have, you know, high academics. Is Vanderbilt handicapped in the way that Stanford is when it comes to taking transfers, and that Stanford essentially, due to their academic, restrictions, they really can't take many?
No, that's the weird thing. It's actually pretty easy compared to Stanford, from what I understand. I think Clark Lea, just from a cultural perspective, he's very particular about what he wants in players, and I think that's something that he has had to get over a little bit. I think he only wanted to take, you know, something like 3 or 4 transfers per class initially when he came in, and he has realized, in my opinion, that that's not going to work. I think they've taken something like 5 or 6 so far, and it's probably going to go up from there in future seasons. And I think Barton Simmons, you know, formerly of this podcast, you know, he's the general manager of Vanderbilt. He's in charge of a lot of the evaluation and building the roster. I'm sure he wants to take transfers, and I think they've had to adjust what they're going to do there, because I think Clark Lea didn't necessarily want to rock the boat in terms of the culture in the locker room, but, you know, they need productive upperclassmen. They don't have a lot of that, because the recruiting under Derek Mason toward the end wasn't very good.
For sure. So let's start on the side of the ball that was maybe not, you know, quite as good last year. 124th in overall offense. Either them or Northwestern was probably the worst Power 5 offense. You can kind of go back and forth debating if you really want to debate about that. You know,
sounds like fun.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Seals and Wright were both kind of awful. Throwing efficiency wise, at least Wright could run the ball pretty well. I remember seeing him in the whatever, it might have been the Colorado State game or whatever game that was, where he all of a sudden he broke out. What do you see happening at the quarterback position this year?
I think Wright probably has a slight advantage coming out of spring ball. And that game that you referenced, I think probably was against Missouri. And that
Okay.
is the best example. I think he had a 70-yard touchdown run or something like that in that game. The offensive line I've already mentioned has been brutal for a few years. And then Tyler Steen, who honestly didn't even have a good season last year, but was still projected to be their best lineman, he transfers to Alabama, and Vanderbilt doesn't really have a left tackle right now. So I don't, maybe the line in general could get better because they could get better at other spots, but I think it'll probably be marginal gains at best. They need transfers there. And the thought is that Ken Seals last season, after a really solid true freshman season, he kind of got the yips behind an offensive line that didn't give him a lot of time. He was playing through injuries, and as a result, he would flush out of the pocket earlier than he needed to, or sometimes in situations where you'd rather have him step up and deliver the ball. He's getting happy feet and running out of there to nowhere, and it screws the whole play over. So at least with Wright, I think, even though Ken Seals, if you had a good offensive line, maybe he would be the better quarterback because he's better at throwing the ball downfield. Wright, though, behind a leaky offensive line, he can make plays with his feet, and maybe you go with him as the starter and hope that he can develop over time as a passer. That has been, probably pretty gradual at best, but that's where I'm at. I mean, he took the first team reps for the most part during the spring, but it was kind of since they had a thin roster due to transfers. Seals got reps with the first team also, but at the beginning of each practice, Wright was the first guy to get the first snaps. So my suspicion is that he kind of is a slight leader in that race right now.
Makes sense. 3 of the top 5 pass catchers, at least by number of targets, are gone. And I just wrote here in my notes, will it matter?
If they can't protect, then they're not going to be able to throw the ball downfield anyway. But what I would say is that they, at least their 2022 class was ranked number 35, I believe, by the 247 Sports Composite. And you saw that in the spring already. Jayden Mcgowan is kind of a guy who was a underlooked 3-star recruit who probably would have gone to Harvard if he hadn't gotten the Vanderbilt offer, but he runs like a 4.35 40, and he looked like one of their best offensive players this spring. He will help fix the team speed issue. So Quincy Skinner Jr. is another guy who was out of St. Thomas Aquinas and had a lot of good offers. He's a true sophomore. So like you said, I mean, the team was so bad last season that when guys go out, even if, they were starters, it's unclear how much that's actually going to affect things because you're losing guys who were kind of so-so players thrust into starting roles at the SEC level.
Sure. Switching to the other side of the ball here, I feel like there's room for optimism, ultimately, given Clark Lea's background. Do you see this unit making a jump this year?
I think so because, one of the big storylines of the spring is that the coaching staff was a lot happier with how the defense played in terms of getting guys around the ball. There were a lot of plays last season, honestly, even against UConn and Colorado State, it's just kind of the dregs of FBS where there was no resistance, either at the point of attack, the edges were not being set well, and teams were just running up the field against a quote-unquote SEC defense that didn't look like one at all. That has improved. There were, if you go back and look at tape of, the scrimmages from this fall or the spring game, there are a lot more tacklers around the ball carrier, basically. I think they're just playing harder. And I also think some of the transfers probably will help on defense. Lucien from UConn, I mentioned, he's a solid player. He got a high 3-star grade of 88 from our transfer portal evaluators. And then Kane Patterson, who was a reserve linebacker at Clemson, but did play for 3 years. I mean, he's a decent player. And then most of the returners, I mean, they return most of their key pieces on that side of the ball, I would say. So I think they are going to take a step forward, and Clark Lea is also going to play a bigger role in the defense this season. I think they could be much more passable on defense, whereas offensively, I don't know if they're going to take a step forward. It could be relatively similar to last year.
For sure. Transfer portal-wise, where do you see Vanderbilt going with, I mean, obviously they have to find remaining spots, but if they do, have those spots open, where do you feel like they would most want to use them? And then realistically, where do you think they'll be able to find players who can help them?
Yeah, I think they're probably going to have another spot or two, and it's got to be focused on the offensive line because I think ultimately you look at the guys who are coming back and they're either pretty untested or they have played and the results were not good. Uh, the one, the hope on offense is that they actually have a play caller. They demoted their offensive coordinator like 1 week into fall camp last season, and that caused some issues. And now they're going to have the same play caller, Joey Lynch, for the whole season. But I just think the offensive line, in terms of not giving the quarterbacks any time to throw, that really screws up the rest of the offense. And I think they need at least one more offensive line addition. They did get Jacob Brammer, who's a former all-conference right tackle or left tackle at North Texas. But, that's a big step up in competition. And I think they probably need one more tackle and one more interior player as well.
No doubt about it. We will stay tuned to Vandy247. Robbie Weinstein, really appreciate it, man. This is it's been informative. And I feel like obviously most people will be picking Vanderbilt for the basement of the East again this year in what is pretty clearly a long-term rebuild. But as you know, we do talk a lot of betting on the show. So I mean, we try to give a lot of attention to all teams because, hell, even if it doesn't show up in the win column as much as Vanderbilt fans might hope, maybe they'll show up in their wallets if they cover a few more spreads this year. So I know
you
we
know
stay
they
tuned.
play against teams that are relevant, so you might as well be aware, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Man, I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
All right, that's the bell. Cover 3 college football summer school is over for today, but don't worry. We'll be back soon with even more episodes filling you in on the top teams in college football. Please give us those 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Follow us on YouTube and on Twitter at Cover 3 Podcast, and we'll see y'all soon.